everyone, and welcome once again to the Open Mic, Writers in Their Own Words, where every show I talk to writers about their work, the publishing industry, and how they do what they do. The show is available by the same name on both YouTube and via all of the major podcast platforms. You can subscribe to either or to both, so you never miss a thing. I, of course, recommend that you subscribe to both, but that's up to you. If you do subscribe, and I'll come back and remind you of this later, please hit the subscribe and also, leave me a nice review. It does help other people find the show. And as I always say, I think other folks interested in writing will want to find the show because you're not going to find a better and certainly more affordable way to get some really good insight into writing and publishing than by talking to people who do it for a living, which is what I'm doing here. And certainly it's what I'm doing today. My guest today is an author with more than 30 books to his credit, and there may be even more than that. We'll talk about it in a minute, including 5 different series ranging from political thrillers, police procedurals, traditional crime fiction, and even cozies. He's here today to talk a bit about all of that and more. So please welcome Colin Conway to the Open Mic, Writers in Their Own Words. How you doing today, man?
I'm doing great, Rich. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, I'm excited to have you because I always enjoy discovering writers whose work I hadn't read before, and I discovered yours only recently in the last year or so. As is often the case, we all end up at the same conferences, and so that's always great for me. I get to meet a lot of new people, and it always inspires me to go out and read some new stuff. And it's particularly pertinent here for me because the work of yours that I got started with was your Cozy series, the Cozy Up series. And as we were talking before we went on the air, I know I've read a cozy or two before, but it's probably been a long time. So, I'm always reading all this hard-boiled stuff, lots of guts and gore, I guess. And, cozies are clearly not that. So that was an interesting entree into your work. But so we'll get to that in just a second. But I wanted to start with a really basic question because, like most writers, you've had a fairly circuitous route to where we're at today. You've been in the Army, you've been a cop, you've done real estate, a blogger. Tell us a little bit more about your pathway to becoming such a prolific writer.
Well, that's a very nice way of saying it. I appreciate it that way. Uh, so writing was kind of an outlet for me to deal with some feelings. A lot of people will talk about how they journal. When I was going through some personal things back in my late 20s, instead of grabbing a journal and saying, I feel bad or I'm sad today, I would just start writing these little short stories. And I would take out my frustrations on these characters. I'd put them into really bad situations, and then they'd have to work their way out, or maybe they wouldn't survive the situation. And so I wrote over a period of time, probably 150 different short stories, and a lot of them were not any good. But it's kind of that thing of practice. You get it, and you just start learning how to do something. And then when I was on the police department, I met another author, Frank Safiro, who I think you know. Frank and I started talking and sharing our stories, and I got encouraged to try and write a book. And so I actually wrote my first book back in 2004, quickly followed it up each year with another book, but I never published those. They basically sat in the digital drawer for 17 years because I could never figure out how to make them right. There was something wrong, and it took me a long time to figure it out. But I just kept writing and kept putting things into that digital drawer. And for a period of time, I found an agent that didn't result in anything worth note. So basically went back on my own, started working with a small publisher, decided that I liked doing things on my own. And that's when I jumped into the indie publishing side of the equation. And I've been doing that for oh gosh, the last 6 years or so.
Well, I was going to ask you about that a little bit later, but let's go to follow up on that now because Yeah, you did start out in the traditional publishing world, which I think most writers, that's their preference, right? They want to get all the stuff that comes with being traditionally published. Um, but as we all know now, I mean, especially in recent years, going independent has become perfectly acceptable and in many ways preferable for a lot of writers. What was the impetus for you to choose that route? I know you said you didn't really uh, it wasn't really working for you the other way, but you seemed like you'd had some success. So how did you choose to go indie, and how has the process been for you so far?
Uh, the process has been fulfilling and rewarding. I'll just say that, and then I'll back up. So it was this thing where if you look at like the major publishing houses, I think that they have a fairly big machine that's behind their authors, and but the authors still have to get out and do a fair amount of press. They've got to do a fair amount of marketing. There's this kind of fallacy out there that with writers that we're artists and we don't have to sell our work, and I think that that's like I said, it's a mistaken concept. With a smaller publisher, there wasn't that machine behind the marketing like there is with the big houses, and that kind of had one of those moments of clarity where I was like, I can do this. I can put my book out there for sale, and I'm still going to be the one that has to do all the marketing. I'm still going to be the one that has to go to the conferences, um, and so basically, it removed the middleman. And nice people. I'm not saying anything bad about the folks that I worked with. They were very, very nice. But this allows me to spend more of my own money, invest more of my time, and the results are either because of me. I should just say it like that. The results are because of me. If they're bad, they're because of my effort, and if they're good, they're because of my effort. And I like that. So yeah, there you go.
What has been the biggest challenge for you in this endeavor so far?
So, and I'm going to steal a quote from a guy named Grant Cardone. He's a master salesman, and I've read a number of his books. And he says that your biggest problem is obscurity, that people don't know who you are, and that is true. I mean, to jump back to that story we were just talking about, the big publishing houses, they have that machine. They can help you get beyond obscurity. When you're an indie author and you're starting out, you have to develop that brand recognition, that name recognition, and that's your biggest hurdle. And to I think so many authors think about sales immediately, like, oh, I want to, how do I get my books to sell, as opposed to how do I get my name out there? Because the more you can get your name out there, the more opportunity there are for people to discover us, the first book in a series, and then go to the second, third, etc.
That's funny because I've talked with other authors who have done a mix of traditional and indie, and they've said the same thing. Discoverability is the real key for them. If you can connect with people enough that they remember you, they'll often give your work a chance too. And that segues into a question I didn't really have for you, but it reminds me of something that I do talk with a lot of writers about, because as a consumer of books, and I am a massive consumer of books, as you might imagine,
Mhm.
it always turns me off when an author's marketing pitch is nonstop. Essentially,
Mhm.
and it feels like marketing. Buy my
Yep.
book, buy my book, buy my book. Hey, my book's on
Yep.
sale. Hey, and I when I've talked with them and said, again, I'm an outlier, but as a consumer, I prefer to connect with the author on a personal level, if it's on social media or whatever, and not always be getting sold, right? That
Right.
subtle selling. What's your thought on how you market yourself? Is there a plan you follow? Is there uh, do you incorporate social media with paid media? What do you have a whole plan, or is it a little more seat of the pants than that? And does it change with the various styles of books you do?
Uh, More to the last question, and that it is going to lean to the style of books. However, I've got this, like you had mentioned in the introduction, and thank you for that. It was very nice, by the way. I run the gamut, so I got to be talking to cozy readers at the same time I'm talking to police procedural or private detective readers, and some of crossover will be there, but some crossover won't. And I completely understand what you're saying about that constant buy my book, buy my book, buy my book. It's a what's the word? It's an unfortunate result of folks not knowing how to present themselves in a sales world. And I'll tell you, I sell commercial real estate besides writing books. And if I was always going up to somebody saying, buy my real estate, buy my real estate, buy my real estate, I'd never get anything done. So there's an idea out there called consultative selling, which is basically, what are you looking for? And if I can help you with what I've got, great. And if I can't help you, let me connect you with somebody else. And that person might be able to help you, buy the piece of real estate that you'd like. And then going forward, you'll remember me. You'll remember me because I wasn't selfish. You'll remember me that, I took care of you, helped you reach your goals. And the next time somebody says, hey, I need a commercial real estate guy, hey, why don't you call this guy over here? I think that's the same thing I try to do with writing is to if you go to my social media or on my newsletters, there's a philosophy I think in social media where it's like you should have nine asks before an offer, or nine like, hey, what are you guys doing, or how's your day, and just talk, because that's social media is supposed to be social, right? And before you say, oh, hey, don't forget I have a book that's available, or I have a series available. So like there's times where I'll put a crime fiction question up. Like one I put up this week was, what's your favorite MacGuffin? And I talked about how Pulp Fiction had the briefcase, as part of it. And we talked about that. And then other people, I just ask folks, where are they from and what's their weather like? Because today we're about 4 inches of snow right now up here in Spokane. And it was really interesting to see how people were experiencing the world so much differently than I was right now. And we had a really nice conversation on that. And so a lot of it's by the seat of my pants. But I do kind of look at the month and I say, oh, at the end of the month, I've got a book coming out. So I want to make, one mention or two mentions, but the rest of it, I'm just going to have conversations about folks. And I do try to stay in a lane, crime fiction, which is a pretty big lane. So I could talk about mysteries or cozies or movies and TV shows. I've talked about what's your favorite, Christmas crime fiction movie. We've done that kind of thing, but stay in that lane. And it's not always buy my book. It's, hey, we're having fun. So,
Well, I'm gonna encourage you to continue that because again, as a consumer, I definitely appreciate that a lot more. You know, so I'm a reporter by trade. I've been a reporter for a long time, and I've had a mix of being on staff and uh, doing freelance work. And so I get asked a lot about freelancing and writing for a living and that kind of thing. And one of the things that I've been telling people who ask me these questions for many, many years is you really have to think like an entrepreneur if you're going to make a living as a freelance person or an independent person doing anything. You have to take a very business-like approach to what it is you're doing. And it varies, of course, what that business is. Of course, with writing, now if you're writing for magazines or whatever, okay, you can't take an assignment as an example that pays you $500 if you're going to have to put 100 hours into it, right?
right.
You will literally be living in a box behind Safeway if that's your
Yeah.
income stream. So that's shocking to a lot of people. I think they have this perception of what the business is like, and then the reality, of course, is very different. Long-winded way of saying, you clearly have a very entrepreneurial mindset. How has that played into all of this for you? Do you feel like it made it easier for you to take the step that you're taking? And has it had any impact on the creative side of what you do? Does it alter your thinking as a creative person when you're whatever one of the stories you're working on, when you have to think about it in that entrepreneurial way?
So and that's a really excellent question regarding the entrepreneurial melding with the creative, and I'll get back to that in just a second. The I'm very lucky in the fact that along my career path, I ended up being in sales. So I'm not afraid of it. The other thing that I feel very fortunate about is that I read a lot in this uh, segment. So I read a lot of sales books, a lot of investment books, that kind of thing. And recently, probably a couple of years ago, I stumbled across a passage in a book that I've read half a dozen times. It's called Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and it's by an author named Robert Kiyosaki. And he talks about how the wealthy create assets. And in that list of assets, he actually wrote books. And it hit me that every time I create a book, that's an asset. It's not just a piece of art. It's an asset, and I'm using that to sell. And once I wrapped my head around that, that really kind of fueled me into thinking of I'm much more of an entrepreneur, and I need to treat this like a business and not like, oh, hey, I really want people to read my books, as opposed to I need to get out and sell my works to people. And so that's when I started doing a lot more advertising. And you had mentioned that in just the previous question, but there's social media that we get for free. Then there's the social media that we advertise on. And I think that's a very important thing for an author to learn how to do. Requires a lot of effort, which now ties into that second part of your question about where does the creativity and the entrepreneurial meld. I will tell you, there are a couple ideas I've got in my head, like, oh, I want to write a standalone book. However, like my Cozy Up series is really selling well right now. And people keep asking, when's the next book coming out for that? And I want to deliver that next book. So that standalone, which is going to be really hard to sell because there's no lead into it, that's
Mhm.
going to sit. That's going to sit on the side. And I've got a couple other series that have a lot of dedicated readers to, and I'm writing the books for that. So it's one of those things where it's I have an idea for a series that I'd like to get to at some point, Rich. But in my mind, that's much more attractive than a one-off book, because I can build a readership for that. Folks who, I get 100 people to get into number one, 50 of them are going to go to number two. Out of that 50, 40 of them are going to go to number three. And by that time, they're going to stick with me through the series, you know.
That's really great advice for people because, in a way, it also leads into a question I had down I want to ask you, which is the experts, and I'm going to use air quotes for anyone who's watching this on YouTube, the experts, um, in this business, they'll often preach that authors should never cross genres or just otherwise stay out of whatever lane, or I should say, wander out of whatever lane that they have had commercial success in, so as not to alienate their audience or to mystify their audience or to, have the audience buy them because of the name and then find out it's something different than what they expected. Now, as I noted in the intro, you write 5 different series. It goes across. You're within the lane of crime fiction, but as you noted, it's a pretty wide lane.
Right,
There's
right.
lots of different ways to go there. So clearly you don't adhere to that mantra of, thou shalt not waver too much. What advice do you have for authors who might be thinking that same thing that you just were talking about? Well, I have this idea. I've built up, say, my horror audience, or I've built up my
Right,
cozy audience,
right.
or my romance audience, but I've got this spy thriller in me, or whatever. It's a leap. What would you say to somebody who came and said, "Hey, man, what do you think about this?"
So, and that's we got some fantastic questions going today, Rich. I really appreciate this. This is awesome. So 3 of my series all take place in the 509 area code. That's Eastern Washington. So there's the 509 crime stories, the John Cutler mysteries, and then the Flip Flop Detective. And they all have some kind of crossover occasionally, where a character from one series will pop into the other. So that was a really easy world to kind of create, where those are all going to be together. When I decided to write the cozy, I did that because of my mother-in-law, really wonderful lady. She liked my writing, but my writing has some swearing in it. I never put any sex on the page, but it's got swearing in it. And she couldn't share my books with the ladies, her friends at church. and because of the swearing. She didn't worry about the violence, it was just the swearing. So that's when I started learning about the cozies, and I created the Cozy Up series, which is I push one of the rails in that genre, and we could talk about that later. Well, the one thing I wish I would have done was create a pen name for that.
Huh.
Now, that one came later. However, here's the thing. You can tell everybody that it's in your newsletter or on your social media, hey, this is Colin Conway writing as, John Doe. And they'll go read that book and they'll understand what you're doing. But it's the new people who are coming in who might not have that understanding. And so I wish I would have done that. And then the other thing is that I have a series that I co-write with Frank Safiro, and it's a political thriller. And I wish we would have used a pen name. And the reason being is that it's not my voice, it's not Frank's voice, it's our voice. So it doesn't sound exactly like my books, and it doesn't sound like his books. If I was teamed up with James Patterson, that would be completely different. You want that James Patterson name. That's really super important. Or if you were teaming up with Lee Child or somebody else, you know what I mean?
Sure.
There's somebody with such a big bankable name. But Frank and I, we're still, kind of working our way up the charts, so to speak. It would have just been as easy for us to put that into a different pen name and just tell our readers, hey, we co-authored a book. It's under this pen name, of whatever. And they would have gone and read it. And then anybody who starts with the Charlie 316 series wouldn't be surprised that, hey, that Colin Conway's work doesn't sound exactly like this series, or Frank's works doesn't sound exactly like this series. So that would be my recommendation, is like, don't be afraid of changing lanes. Like, hey, if you're writing horror and suddenly you want to go write science fiction, do it. Use a pen name and just tell those horror readers who've been very loyal to you that you wrote this over here and that you've got a pen name. I think that most readers out there are really understanding, and if they like you as an author, but they like you as a person. Like if you've been open on social media and if you've been open in your newsletters, they're going to go to bat for you. I mean, some of my readers are fabulous, fabulous folks. I mean, they're just, I can't say enough nice things. They're just always there, always there. So
Right.
no.
Well, I love the pen name thing too. One of my favorite authors, a guy named Peter Abrahams, has done fabulous. Stephen King called him his favorite thriller author and all that, which is hardly anything like faint praise. Um, but his most well-known work is actually the work he's done under his pen name Spencer Quinn, which is the whole Chet and Bernie mystery series, which has
Mhm.
spawned middle grade books and all kinds of stuff, honestly, with his pen name. He doesn't even write much under his own name anymore. So
Yeah, yeah.
that's definitely good advice. You mentioned Eastern Washington and specifically Spokane, which, is a setting for a lot of your work. And of course, there's another somewhat well-known guy from Spokane, some of you may have heard of, guy named Jess Walter, who often makes Spokane his a setting. You know, Spokane is a beautiful city for anyone who hasn't been there. River running right through the middle of town, waterfall. I mean,
Mhm.
just absolutely a stunningly beautiful city. But what makes it such a good locale for crime fiction?
That's a good question, and I keep saying that to you, man. I'm having a great time here. So here's the thing: like I always thought Spokane was kind of this sleepy town. When I grew up here and I went away to the army, I came home. Spokane just seemed sleepy, and then I got onto the police department, and all of a sudden I had my eyes open to all the things that are happening behind closed doors or in the alleys, and it's like, oh my gosh, this is like Seattle. It's like Portland. Maybe on a scale of mass will be smaller, but there's still murders. There's still robbery. There's still conspiracies. There's still all sorts of crazy stuff that's occurring. And so it was one of those things where I could have written my story, put it over in Seattle, where it's a location that a lot of people, most Americans are going to know about Seattle. Big sports town over there. Not a lot of people do stuff in Spokane. You mentioned Jess Walter, and he's a fantastic author. But not a lot of people are doing it here. So it felt like a lot of ground I could cover and, have a great time. And I wasn't going to bump into somebody else trying to be doing the same thing. So I absolutely love that as a background. I don't have that as my cozy ups. They take place all over the
Yes.
U.S. But yeah, I love this locale. So
Well, yes, it's all of Washington is gorgeous. My wife and I have many, many friends in Seattle and the Seattle area, and all the way to, Portland and all over. But I have family in Eastern Washington and Yakima and places like that. So yes, Eastern Washington is a stunningly beautiful place. So
one of the things, and sorry to interrupt you before you move on here. You asked what makes it so interesting. There's a lot of things that make it interesting, but there's four seasons. Obviously, right now, like I mentioned, we're getting just pounded with snow. So I've had books that take place in spring, summer, fall, winter. But the culture of Eastern Washington is radically different than Western Washington. Western Washington is extremely liberal on this side of the state, much more conservative.
mhm.
Spokane City is starting to lean a little bit more liberal because we're growing and we're getting an influx of people from larger cities. Um, However, that's a really interesting dynamic in our city politics and our state politics and the way that people perceive this region. And I think that I get some comments sometimes from folks who read the stories and they don't realize like how politically different the two sides of the state are. And
Yeah.
in every one of those books, I start off what is the 509 to explain the area code and how it's different from that Seattle area. So
Yeah, well, and Oregon is the same way. Eastern Oregon is so different from the coastal areas of Oregon. Here in California, where I'm at, we're a pretty solidly blue state. But if you go into the Central Valley, which is huge, by the way, the Central Valley of California is bigger than many states. In fact, I think it's bigger than most states. If it was a separate state, it would probably be the 10th or 12th biggest state in the country. So,
uh,
and it's very, very conservative. So, you go up, you go east here, you get up close to the Oregon border. I mean, that's where you have, all these uh, state of Jefferson folks that are always wanting to secede. And, so yeah,
yeah,
it does make
yeah,
for very interesting differences. You know, I mean, I think all of us try to stay away from politics, and I'm a political
oh
reporter
yeah,
by trade, so I cover politics. So I definitely try to leave it out of anything I'm writing.
yeah,
But it does for people who are not from, I'll use California more as an example because I think everyone in the rest of the country thinks we're crazy here. And it's true. There's definitely got that. But again, where you're at, there's places here, we call the Central Valley here, Calabama. So, it's if you're gonna make the Central Valley your setting here, you better not make it like San Francisco because it's nothing like that. I mean, they're light.
yeah, yeah.
I
Uh-huh.
understand where you're coming from. It does change the dynamic a little bit. So, speaking of changing the dynamic, so we were talking about how you write the multiple series, and a lot of them come from different areas. How do you approach writing when you're writing a cozy, as an example, from when you were writing something that's more hard-boiled, like the John Cutler series, or any of the other series, or even maybe the standalone that you're thinking about, when you know that you're more to one genre than one of the others or one aspect of the genre, does it affect at all how you write? Now, again, we know there's rules about cozies. You're not going to swear and sex and violence, that kind of thing. But does it change even maybe the way you approach the plotting or the characters or even the other basics, pacing, dialogue, anything like
Yeah.
that? How does it affect your approach?
Well, okay, so uh, the especially the plotting or let's go with the plotting, but the mechanics of the cozy because my cozies tend to be very funny and writing humor takes so much extra effort where a lot of times I'll write a scene and it's not coming off as funny as I want and I'll have to go back and I'll have to return to that scene multiple times to find the funny where I don't have to do that in a police procedural, or I'm writing the next flip-flop detective novel right now, and that has a lighter tone to it, and it's kind of a quasi Jim Rockford type of feel to it, where there's a little bit of humor in it, but it much more of kind of a traditional amateur sleuth, and I can use some pacing from my police procedural novels, and there gets to be some humor in that because my character has a different viewpoint on life. He goes wherever the sun is. He leaves Spokane whenever it turns winter, and he returns back to one of the lakes in the area. And um, that's not as hard. The easiest ones to write are the 509, the police procedural, and the John Cutler, because if the humor's in there, if it's maybe once or twice in a book, between a couple characters, and then that's it. But in the cozies, it requires so much work, so much effort to make sure that the reader is laughing on a consistent basis, or at least chuckling on a consistent basis. And it is I have to come up with quirkier characters as opposed to, grimy, gritty, mean people that we would contact when I was on the police department. I got to come up with quirky characters and have fun situations. And so to your question, that one takes as probably double effort to write than the other series.
And you have to, I'm sure, think about when you're going to go write one of those, you have to think about the rest of your life. You have a job, you have,
Mhm.
obligations. Do I have time to write one of these right now compared to one of the other ones that I could write in maybe half the time or in a different way? I mean, that's something we think about that often when you have an idea and you want to follow it, but it may not be the best idea for you to follow at that time, given whatever else is going on in your world. Never even thought about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So along those lines, you have an interesting story I read on your blog on how you came to write one of the 509 series books, Side Hustle. And I love that story. Do you mind sharing that with us?
Oh yeah. So I was writing a financial blog, or not financial, but a personal finance blog, where I had gone down a path with a writers group, and I'd gotten a little bit burnt out on it, and I kind of lost some of my confidence. But I was still wanting to write, so I started this blog, and I was sharing my journey out of kind of my financial malaise that I put myself into in my 20s and 30s. And as I was correcting course and starting to buy some commercial real estate with a buddy of mine, it was a way for me to share at the same time as continue to write. I wasn't doing any crime fiction writing at that time. And during that process, I learned about uh, the personal finance community out there. And I thought, wow, how, when I started getting the juices to write a crime fiction novel again, I thought, how interesting would that be to write a story about a personal finance blogger who is murdered, and the police have to solve it. And so what I did as part of the backstory on that is, I've read a lot of detective novels with a detective who has, or a protagonist who has, alcohol addiction or drug addiction, or, some other problem. But I've never read anybody who's got a financial problem. And I know personally a lot of people who have worked their way, or are in a financial issue, or worked their way out of financial issue. And I thought, well, how about I slip a little bit of this guy's journey? He meets this guy who's this personal finance guy, and starts to turn his life around. It was kind of a cathartic thing for me to do. And I've actually gotten a lot of nice folks who have read and said, wow, you gave me a lot of food for thought. I actually went and met with a financial planner after that. And it wasn't like I was beating anybody over the head. It was just kind of this undercurrent of the story, because I didn't want to have an alcoholic detective. I wanted the guy with that, and he lost his marriage because of his behavior, and he was upset by that. He loved his wife, and so it was that's where it came from. It was born of writing that blog.
Well, I appreciate you sharing it because I think it's another one of those things. Uh, I don't hear it as much as I used to, but I remember going to conferences um, back in my early days. I just the way it all worked for me, I got started on a path for a while, had some major life stuff happen, dropped out of doing any kind of fiction writing for many, many years. So some of these stories go back to what I call, Rich 1.0 when I was first on that path. But I used to hear people say all the time, ask writers when we meet these things, oh, where do you come up with your ideas? And it always drove me crazy. It's like, well, where do you think, right? And I always thought most of the authors were very gracious and but you could just see their face change, like, that's where do you think? Pick up a newspaper, listen, do you listen to music? Do you have two working eyeballs? I mean, what
Yeah.
is the thing? But I just thought that was an interesting when I read that piece on your blog about side hustle. I said, oh, now see, now that's I love that layer of creativity. You're taking something from your personal life, figuring out a way to completely fictionalize it and turn it into a book. So I hope anyone watching or listening to this thinks to exercise that muscle in their own life when it comes to their creativity. It's all around you. It all is just a matter of how much, you're allowing your mind to wander around and settle on an idea.
You mentioned music. The second book in that series, after the side hustle, is called "The Long Cold Winter," and there's a song by a band. I'm a metalhead from the '80s. There's a band called Cinderella, and they had this song called "Long Cold Winter," and it's a very sad song, and it's going to be a long cold winter without your love. And I had this image while I was listening to that song of a guy standing at the grave mourning his wife, and I kept hearing that song and I listened to it day after day while I was going into the job. And I decided that's what I'm going to write for my second book. And that it came from that song. And I was very fortunate. I reached out to the songwriter and one of the original band members and asked if I could have the opening or the chorus as my epigraph in the book, and he said yeah, because I just absolutely love that song so much. And anyway, those ideas come from everywhere.
Absolutely. Um, Reviews also come from everywhere. And I ask most of the writers this question because, look, any creative work is very subjective. And, fortunately, a lot of people are kind and respectful on how they do reviews, others are not. Do you read reviews? And if so, what's the worst one you ever had? Did you ever have somebody just beat the hell out of you?
Oh yeah, yeah. So I do read my reviews. I know some authors who don't. I think I have a thick enough skin to handle somebody saying something mean about me. The reason that I read them is that I ask all of my readers at the end of my books, hey, if you enjoyed or I don't even ask if they enjoyed it. I said, hey, if you would you go leave a review of the book? And so I think I owe it to the reader, since I asked them to leave a review, then I'm going to go check. And sometimes they'll write and they'll say, hey, I love the book, or I like the book, and I left you a review, and I'll go check that way. But every day, as part of this routine I've got, as I'm starting my day, I check. I don't check before I start my writing because I don't want any reviews in my head. But when I'm done for my creative period in the morning, that's one of the things that I do. And so I have had one, and it was for the Cozy Up to Death. Um, uh, a gal gave me a 1-star review, and her headline for Amazon was yucky, and she said, "Not one redeeming character in the book. It's not worth to read even for a cat." And I summarized that last little bit, but I always remembered the yucky headline. It was like, wow. And it's reading a book is subjective. It's one of those things that I wrote this book for my mother-in-law so she could share it with her friends at church, and her friends really liked it. My mom and her friends really like this book, and I have a lot of readers who have read this book. So one person telling me it's yucky, that's all right. It rolls off the shoulders.
That's an awesome headline though. I can imagine, you go to check the reviews and you just see that big all caps with a lot of exclamation points. You're like, oh,
Yeah,
they liked it.
yeah, yeah.
So I only have one more serious question here, which is we've talked a lot about multiple genres and genre crossing and lane wandering, that kind of thing. Is there anything that along this line that you haven't tackled yet? Is there something? I know you said you had a standalone novel in your head that you're setting aside right now to pay attention to one of your series, but is there something out there that you really that would be a little different for you that you want to go after that you're keeping on the radar no matter what?
Yeah, there's two. One is the standalone book I mentioned, and then this series ideas I'm playing with. And the standalone is haven't quite figured out which way I want to go with it, but it might be a young adult novel about that period of time right after we leave high school, before we all go into our separate ways. And so that's bounced around in my head, and I've got some ideas for it, but I just don't know exactly how I want to handle it. And then the other one is because I've done police procedural, private detective, amateur sleuth, and thriller cozies. I want to try an action adventure series. And so that's the one that's on the sidelines. I'm putting ideas into it right now. When it gets to a little bit more of a shape, to use that metaphor, then I might give it a run. But right now, I've got ideas for, like I said, I'm working on the next Flip Flop Detective. I've got ideas for the next Cozy. Got ideas for the next 509. There's all sorts of ideas in the series that I've already got. So I'm not going to run out of ideas anytime soon.
Well, that's good, I mean, because that's one of the things that I think also when you work that muscle of developing the grains of creativity, you find that you develop a lot more of them than you can ever use. But it's like anything else. You've got to work on them, right? Because we all have
Right.
it, but if you don't exercise, so use it or lose it, right? It's that classic thing.
100%. Yeah.
So I always like to end on what I hope and intend to be a fun question. A little one of those things of, a little connection with people who may not know you well. I'm going to offer you three names with the premise that I have the omniscient power to put you together with one of these three people for a conversation or a drink or dinner or whatever you're choosing. Who would you choose and why? And I try to have a theme to them now in this day and age. So I'll let you see if you identify the theme. You probably will, but the options I'm going to give you are uh, Sonny Barger, the late co-founder of the Hells Angels, Peter Fonda, the actor, of course, and another actor, of course, Marlon Brando. I could put you together with one of those three people. Which one would you choose and why?
Oh man, that's a good one. That's a good one. Um, you kind of stumped me on this one. I'd probably go with Sunny. I'd probably go with Sunny, so I could have, kind of that sit down face to face, and yeah, that'd be an interesting conversation. But I got to tell you, also Marlon Brando sounds really interesting because he's been in a couple of my favorite movies, a few of them, and but I think I'd go with Sunny. I think I'd go want to sit down and talk to him.
Well, one of my very dear friends growing up, his father was in the Angels, and he knew Sonny quite well. I never did, but he's passed now, but he's a really interesting cat. Not everybody's cup of tea for sure. Did you
Yeah.
catch the theme though?
Oh yeah, they were all related to bikers because you had Peter
Yeah.
Fonda, which was Easy Rider, and you had Marlon Brando from the
Yes,
Wild Ones.
absolutely.
Yeah,
I figured you'd get that. That shouldn't have been
yeah.
too much of a stump, but
No, that was a good one. That was a good one.
Well, Colin, thank you so much for joining me here today on the open mic. I really appreciate it. I'm going to tell everybody, look, if you haven't discovered Colin's work, check it out. I mean, he's got he's got 5 different series for you to choose from. I'm quite sure something in there will be to your taste if you're into crime fiction at all. And I will tell you, if you non-key sheeting He-Man out there, if you're hesitant about checking out a cozy, because that's for old ladies, well, as the tagline says, this is not your grandmother's cozies. I guarantee you that's really the truth.
Yeah,
I'm a big noir fan, so if I like a cozy, just take that for what it is. Good stuff. And a good
awesome.
guy, of course, that's always tantamount too. Thanks again, like I say, for coming on the show. Really appreciate it very much. And looking forward to seeing you, I guess, at Left Coast Crime next this coming April.
Yeah, yeah. No, I look forward to it, and thanks for having me on. It was a fantastic time. I appreciate it.
Great. Well, I will remind everybody once again, if you would be so kind, hit subscribe. And even if you don't subscribe, be so kind as to leave a review. Help other people find the show. It really does when you leave reviews, and 5-star reviews. It does help people find the show, and I think it'll be of value to anybody who's interested in writing. I will leave you with one last thing. It's the same thing I leave you with every time. I mean it from the bottom of my heart. It's a personal message to me. Tomorrow is not promised to anybody. Please make today count. Until next time, this is for my guest, Colin Conway. I'm Rich Ives, and this has been the Open Mic. Good night.